So our first speaker will be Dr. Ayat. Ayat. I'm already, you see? I'm already getting confused.
I just need to set this here.
I don't know why I can't find my 1 minute. Our first speaker will be Ayat Agah, right? Dr. Agah is a graduate of the Claremont, and I was reminded by her that she's also an undergraduate alumnus of George Mason, so we're very happy to welcome her back to her undergraduate alma mater. But she has got a doctorate from the Claremont Graduate University in Religious Studies, and her work focuses on women in religion and Islamic studies. She's going to be speaking with us today about the concept of walaya and how it can be understood and applied to hierarchies of power. And so we'll begin with Dr. Ayat, and then we will continue with the other illustrious speakers on the panel. I believe we're going to take question and answer at the end of all three of our speakers. So take notes and hold your thoughts until all of our speakers are finished. Welcome. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Can everyone hear me okay? Thank you to our host and organizers for bringing us together to discuss such a rich and always timely topic. I look forward to being in conversation with my co-panelists and with all of you over these 2 days. Ashhadu anna Fatimata Zahra waliyat Allah. This refrain, I bear witness that Fatima the Radiant is the waliya of Allah, is what my father came to include over the years in his personal call to prayer. He would sometimes recite it in public if he was in a gathering of those who share his adoration for her. This testament to the status of Fatima as a waliya, an intimate, a trustee, a lover of Allah, is at the heart of my paper, which explores what it means to know Fatima as waliyat Allah, and how her status as such provides an exemplary model for Muslim women in leadership. While the term wali, the feminine being waliya, has been translated and understood within Sufi traditions to mean friend of Allah, to render it closest to the manner in which I refer to it, I will use the term guardian, if not wali or waliya, and I understand it to encompass a multi-dimensional position that reflects a reciprocal relationship of love between the Creator and creation. This relationship is borne out in the covenant, the mithaq, between Allah and humanity, in the Quranic account whereby Allah asks, Alastu birabbikum, am I not your Lord? And the response from the descendants of Adam is yes. Herein, humanity entered into a walaya relationship with Allah, whereby Allah provides for the material and spiritual needs of humankind, and in return, humanity expresses devotion to Allah through acts of worship and maintaining certain rules of conduct that are for the betterment of oneself and the greater community. The naming of Fatima as waliyat Allah is in keeping with devotional practices that demonstrate the centrality of walaya, or guardianship, to Muslim theology and identity, and its significance as a form of relationship that expresses Allah's love for humanity and humanity's love for Allah. In forms of praxis that include the daily call to prayer, shrine visitations, and the language used in supplications recited in honor of and taught by the Prophet Muhammad and his family, such as Jawm al-Kabira and Ziyarat al-Shura, we find expressions of walaya that reiterate an understanding of the promise that the Creator will always provide a guide for creation. While there isn't time here to go in depth into all of the ways that Fatima and her family are invoked in these supplications, these descriptions offer a rich resource for understanding a particular theology of care, mercy, justice, and compassion, all rooted in love and embodied by the Prophet and his family. Returning to the notion of walaya as an expression of divine guidance, this intrinsically connects walaya to the doctrine of imamat. In the the most simplest terms, this doctrine affirms the appointment of imams or leaders following the death of the Prophet as inheritors of his wisdom and intimacy with Allah, as well as his responsibility to the Muslim community as spiritual and political leader. For the Shia, the incident of Qadir al-Khum, a commonly accepted narrative within Shi'i and Sunni sources, gives an account of what took place leading up to and surrounding the Prophet's death. This is the narrative whereby during the return journey from the Prophet's final Hajj, he declares that for whomever he was a Mawla, Ali is also a Mawla, a term synonymous to wali or guardian. Ali as Mawla upholds the notion of wilaya as a form of guardianship that encompasses religious, spiritual, and socio-political dimensions. The etymological link to Surah 5, verse 55, that is, to the idea of a human wali as a protector who abides by Allah's rules and reflects Allah's attributes, as Ali does, reflects the significance of wilaya as crucial to the role of leadership within the community. For the sake of time, I will simply state here that based on historical and hadith-based narratives, we can recount the role that Ali played as an intimate supporter of the Prophet and his message during his lifetime and after his death, particularly the role he played in upholding the teachings and practices of the Prophet as imam, leader, and teacher. But let us return to the figure of Fatima and the significance of wilaya and imama in understanding her historical and ongoing role in relationship to the community of believers. If we begin from the premise of Prophet Muhammad as the one responsible for teaching through word and example the message of Islam, and a line of imams as understood within Shi'i thought to be the carriers of those teachings through word and example, then Fatima is the connection between the Prophet and imams. Altogether, they are, as Amir Moisi reminds us within the context of the spirituality of Shi'i Islam, figures who are understood to be the embodiment of Allah's attributes. They are exemplars of leadership within their historical communities and embody an egalitarian and love-filled form of guardianship that transcends time. One obvious characteristic of the way in which the family of the Prophet embody wilaya is regarding gender. None of them is excluded from embodying wilaya in specific ways because of their gender. We can extend this reality to make the case that the capacity within humans to potentially embody wilaya is not differentiated among them based on gender. In addition to using the wilaya of the Prophet and his family to make the case that embodying wilaya is not tied to gender, we can also draw on the Quranic notion of human beings originating from a single nafs, nafsin wahidatan, and therefore being ontologically equal to emphasize the equal capacity among humans to potentially grasp their own existence within wilaya, with Allah, and to in turn reflect wilaya towards those with whom we are in community, be it on a small familial scale or on a much larger global scale. In a notable parallel, just as the human capacity to recognize and embody wilaya originates from a single nafs, the wilaya shared among the Ahl Bayt originates from Fatima. Though the Prophet was ridiculed by some for not having male heirs to continue his line, it is Fatima who is the means for the line of the Imams to continue from her father and beyond her husband Ali. And even in relation to her own biological father, Fatima is discussed ontologically, or in a spiritual sense, as Agah, the mother of her father. As cited in sources like Ibn Babayla al-Qawmi's Ila al-Sharia, Fatima is the Majma al-Nurayn, which is understood to mean that her existence is the site of the coming together of the light of Nubuwwah, prophecy, and Imama, leadership. This can be read alongside a hadith of the Prophet, among other descriptions, which describe Fatima saying, "Wahiya ruhi allati bayna janbi," meaning she is my ruh, my soul, that resides within my two sides. In another tradition, cited among other places by Sayyid Mir Jahani Tabatabai, Allah says to the Prophet in a hadith Qudsi, "O Ahmad, if it were not for you, I would not have created the heavens. And if it were not for Ali, I would not have created you. And if it were not for Fatima, I would not have created either of you." This primordial understanding of Fatima as a vessel for even her own father's existence is central to my reading of her as an exemplary model of leadership. in that she not only embodies wilaya in a way that serves as a template for how to lead, but that she is the source of wilaya for those who wish to lead. Here I find Sadia Sheikh's methodology of looking at the lives of women held up as exemplars for believers useful for considering how the lives of figures like Fatima and his granddaughter Zainab, and the daughter of the Prophet and his granddaughter Zainab are employed as models for Muslim women. In relation to wilaya, Fatima, the link between the Prophet and the Imams, the mother of them all, can be read as possessing wilaya and an initiator of it in her own right. By recognizing her as part of the construction of the light of Muhammad and its emanation through the Imams, the historical figure of Fatima as a woman is significant for recognizing the capacity of women to manifest wilaya. Through invoking her example, strength, patience, and sense of justice, Fatima is a source of guidance for those who seek to lead. Among the moments in Fatima's life on this earth that we can look to for how she embodied wilaya is in her role as the caretaker of the land of Fadak. So let's spend some time on Fadak, what it is, and how it came to figure in the life of Fatima. In 628, about 7 years after Hijrah, the Battle of Khaybar took place, and the Muslims came out victorious, in great part due to the feat of Ali tearing the gate off of the Al-Banus fort and allowing the entry of the Muslim soldiers. According to various accounts that follow, the Jewish tribes that lived in Fadak, an agricultural area outside of Medina, either heard of the Muslims' win at Khaybar or received a contingent of soldiers led by Ali who came to discuss ownership of the land. Despite the variations in detail, the consensus on Fadak is that the Jewish community did not wish to fight, and Fadak became fay, or bestowal, a spoil of war gained without battle, as mentioned in Quran in Surah 59, Ayat 6. By all accounts, the land of Fadak was given by the Prophet during his lifetime to Fatima. In his Tafsir al-Mizan, Tabatabai returns to Surah 59 and points to Ayah 7 that follows the establishment of Fay to say that this verse makes it clear that Fay is intended, quote, for Allah and the Apostle, the relatives, and the orphans, the needy, and the traveler. That Fatima was entitled to Fadak is further held up by verse 26 of Surah 17 that reads, give the relatives, Qurba, their due right. What is important to note here is that Fadak was not simply land for Fatima to own for herself. In fact, the proceeds of the land were managed by her as a way of supporting her community, and she hired deputies to manage the land so that it could benefit her people, her father's followers. It is this role that I point to as one example of Fatima's embodiment of wilaya, in this case providing guardianship in a material sense by ensuring provisions for her community and supporting their livelihood. This has been documented by Al-Majusi and Bahar al-Anwar, who also narrates that Fadak yielded 24,000 dinars annually, and that after meeting the needs of her family, Fatima distributed the remaining proceeds to the needy. In her latest book, Feminist Theology and Social Justice in Islam, a study on the sermon of Fatima, Mahja bin Dola explores the incident of Fadak in depth. She discusses, for example, its confiscation by Abu Bakr following his claim to leadership after the death of the Prophet and the implications of Fatima's refusal to let this confiscation go unanswered. What I want to focus on is where we see another reflection of Fatima's embodiment of wilaya in her response to the taking of Fadak, specifically the way in which she calls out an injustice and attempts to uphold what was intended by her father for the benefit of her community, not only in the form of Fadak, but through his Quranic message. Fatima delivered the sermon of Fadak, Khutbah Fadakiyah, in the Prophet's mosque where Abu Bakr held court, and in turn she reminds the people present of their oath, calling, O the community of the Muhajir and Ansar, support God and the daughter of your Prophet. Indeed, on the day of the pledge, allegiance of Ukhba, you swore an oath to protect the Prophet and his children, just as you would protect yourselves and your children. Honor your word, be loyal to the Prophet of God. One can read through her sermon and see how she lays out the teachings of Islam, her words encapsulating the overall message of her father, from professing Tawheed and the recognition of Allah as the bestower of all things, to bearing witness to the prophethood of her father and revelation of the Quran through him and all that they impart upon the community of believers, including the form of guidance that the community was to inherit. As such, Fatima also reminds those listening of the role of her husband Ali and her family in upholding the message of Islam, and all throughout she quotes the Quran, including verse 49 of Surah 9, pointing out to the community that they had already fallen into discord. Specifically in regard to Fadak, she rejects the argument set forth by taking it from her, that the children of the prophets do not inherit. She points to the Quranic, She points to the Quranic precedent of Solomon inheriting from David and the call of Yahya asking for an heir, and makes the case that there is no reason why she too cannot inherit from her father. But beyond this, she reminds the community of their previous commitments to the prophet and his family as leaders and sources of guidance. She describes the choice to turn from what was intended in terms of her role and the role of her family as awliya as leading towards a disgraceful end, begetting eternal infamy and headed towards the fire of Allah. What stands out in the sermon of her, as part of her embodiment of Walaya are the following reminders, where in referencing herself and her family, Fatima declares that Allah ordained obedience to us to secure the order for the nation, our leadership in Malmat to secure the community from disunity, and love for us to strengthen Islam. These reminders, in conjunction with the reminders for establishing prayer, performing Hajj, upholding justice, and honoring pledges, and other decrees related to individual and communal behavior, offer a comprehensive set of guidance for fulfilling the commitment to being a follower of the Prophet and to believe in Islam. So Fadak serves not only as an example of Fatima's role as Waliyat Allah, because it is a concrete example of a woman using her voice to speak truth to power, and to do so in a public setting and in opposition to the leader of the time, but because of the connections she herself makes to the centrality of her and her family's role to the well-being of the community of believers. So let me jump ahead so I stay within my time. Just to draw an feminist paradigm, Fatima's sermon of Fadak illustrates the idea that the personal is political. Not so much because it was a personal piece of property being taken from her, but because of the political implications for the community that laid in her having authority and control over this land and how the proceeds of it were used. So if we jump ahead to using Fatima as an exemplary leader, we can turn to the question of what then does a Muslim leader look like who follows Fatima. And one thing that I wanted to draw on just in terms of timeliness was, if any of you have heard the commencement speak of Ruha Benjamin, who recently spoke at Spelman College about, quote, black faces in high places, and she reminds us that our identities cannot save us, quote, if we allow ourselves to be conscripted into positions of power that maintain the oppressive status quo. So in other words, we cannot assume that simply someone who calls themselves Muslim being in a position of power is enough to ensure that they will act in an ethical fashion. It is not enough to say, I fast, I pray, I observe hijab, or perform other acts that we often reduce Islam to, and comfortably claim one is a just Muslim leader. What needs to be ensured and is connected back to Walaya is the practice of tawalla and tabara, allying ourselves with those who are just and distancing ourselves or even hating those who are unjust. Such leaders who remain true to who they are as Muslim women, who uphold the values of the Islam they claim, might exercise their power in the following ways. If they hold office in this country at the local level, they will work to house and feed everyone living in their jurisdiction. If they hold office in this country at the federal level, they will prevent their government from funding and arming a genocide. If they hold office in an institution of higher education, they will not subject their students to violence for speaking out against injustice. Such leaders would recall the righteous anger of Fatima, who was driven to speak truth and remind those around her of their oaths, their commitment to uphold what is right and prevent what is wrong within their covenant with Allah.